On January 23, 1971, a small group of hunters found a cloth bag in the middle of the desert. They thought they had found someone else's catch. When they opened it to see what was inside, they were shocked to find the body of a woman. No one knew what would happen in the years that came after. Who was this woman, and why did someone kill her? Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious Case 007. If you are new here, please consider subscribing, as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the 52 years old Jane Doe finally identified in 2023. Let's get right to looking into the case of Mojave Jane Doe, a victim whose name was kept secret for 50 years before she got it back. In the 1860, the first people to live in the area were the Mojave people. It is now the second largest county in the state of Arizona. When the Great Depression started, Mojave County's image as a place to mine for gold started to go away. Miners and soldiers used it as a vacation spot, but as the mining business grew, people began to leave. People are becoming more interested in the gold rush, which has made Mojave a popular place for tourists. People flock to the national parks and use the area as a quick way to get to the Grand Canyon, Route 66, and Hoover Dam. But on January 23, 1971, Mojave County was the scene of a murder mystery that the sheriff's office is still trying to solve. 3 shooters were looking for game in an isolated part of Mojave County, Arizona. They found a bag in the desert that said deer pack and was made of cloth. The bag was tied loosely with a white cotton rope, and it had been left in the desert along the Hackberry gravel road. They opened the sack to look inside because they thought it might be a dead animal that another group of hunters had left behind. They were shocked and horrified to find the twisted body of a woman. When the cops were called, they closed off the area right away so they could start their investigation. Investigators knew that the victim had been killed and that the person who did it was trying to hide the crime. They didn't find anything. No IDs, bags, or purses were found near the crime scene. Investigators sent her body to the Mojave County Coroner's Office for an autopsy while they continued to question the hunters about any strange behavior in the area. It was clear from the start that the woman had been murdered because the person who did it didn't leave any clues and got away without being caught. At first, the reason of her death was not known, because there were no signs of blunt force trauma or gunshot wounds. There were also no signs of a health-related death, like a stroke or heart attack, and the toxicology reports said that her innards were healthy. But because she was in a cloth sack, it was hard to tell if there were any marks around her neck from being tied down. She wore a long-sleeved black cardigan, a blouse with 5 brass buttons down the front and burnt orange stretch trousers, with the phrase "Symphony is what's happening" stitched inside. She wore black leather pixie boots that were a size and a half and bobby socks that might have been white at one point. People said that her hair was done in a salon way and that she looked clean and put together. Her pedicure was neat and even, but what really stood out was how much work she had done on her teeth. Her nails were nice and clean. She was missing 2 teeth and had a dental bridge that was worth about $2,100. Even though detectives worked hard on the case, they were never able to find out who she really was. The police put an ad in the local papers with a sketch of the woman, but this did not lead to any possible leads. Then, they tried other ways to find out who the person was, like talking to customers at nearby places that catered to people from the upper middle class and checking out clothing stores. In addition, they looked through the passenger lists of airlines and put an ad for a lost person in a dental magazine. Still, none of these efforts led to any solid clues. The search for the missing person got bigger, and missing persons notices were put up in Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. Even though 23 women had been reported missing during that time, none of them fit the description of the Mojave Jane Doe. Investigators talked to almost 5,000 people who had filed for hunting licenses during that season as part of their search for possible criminals in the hunting community. They thought that the murder was a so-called mama-papa killing, which means that an angry husband did it. Still, this did not lead to any good results either. Even though they tried very hard, they were not able to figure out who the Mojave Jane Doe was. She was put to rest in the Mountain View Cemetery in Kingman. The simple inscription on her gravestone says Jane Doe and the date of her death, January 29, 1971. In 2001, 30 years later, a detective with the Special Investigation Unit was asked to find out who the Mojave Jane Doe was. In 1999, the Mojave County Sheriff's Office made the Special Investigations Unit SIU to look into, solve, and close cold cases. The Mojave Woman Doe case was the oldest of the almost 60 cases that year that had not been solved. Miller and her team did a careful investigation, just like the ones that came before them. Miller and the other detectives looked at old files and notes about cases. They talked to witnesses again to help them remember more and maybe find new clues. They sent in their fingerprints again and looked at their teeth records again, but nothing worked. Miller and her team also asked an artist from the Museum of Northern Arizona to make a composite of Jane Doe using pictures of her skull taken after she died. They thought that the new artist would be able to show off the victim's best qualities in a more professional way that might draw someone who knew her. Again, they used national media to spread the word about the case, hoping that after 30 years, one of Jane Doe's children or family members would come forward. No luck again. Miller's team also looked for connections to the company that made the victims sack, Deer Pack, Ames, Harris, Neville, and Company, but they had been bought out. Miller and her group went back to the case 20 years later. They kept an eye on databases and followed up on all tips. Jane Doe was the one person who could help. Miller's team tried to find the victim's brand of clothing, but it was no longer made. In November of 2021, the case was added to the NAMIS database, but no results were found. All leads were used up by investigators. As part of their review of the case, the sheriff's office changed their Facebook post about people who were missing or couldn't be found. 51 years after the Mojave Jane Doe was found, a forensic family group from Texas called Othram Inc. reached out to them in October 2022. The company said on Facebook that it would use Jane Doe's DNA information and geneticists' new DNA technology to make a family tree. The new technology cost a lot of money and took a lot of time. Before that, investigators shared the composite sketch on their Facebook page again, hoping to find more information, but nothing happened. Miller and her team only saw one choice. She said that the only way to find out who she was through genetic history. The people on the research team took it to heart. As a wife, daughter, or mother, she might have been missed. Even though there were no conclusions, proof was filed. The Mojave Jane Doe case was their catchphrase to give closure to the family and victims who couldn't speak up for themselves. After praying about it, the investigators picked genetic testing. For testing, the sheriff's office gave $1,000. Miller said that even though the county was big, it had few people and not much money. But other groups set up a donation website to raise the final $6,500 needed to start testing, hoping that the community will open its heart to give the Mojave Jane Doe her dignity. The Dear Gladys page of DNA Solves helped raise money. Response was huge. Within 5 days of making the page, the rest of the money had been raised, and testing could begin. First, the investigators had to dig up Mojave Jane Doe's. After the Mojave County Court gave permission in November 2022, the grave site was dug up. The bones were in bad shape because they were old, but scientists were able to get enough DNA to test. Because a thumb wasn't ready to be tested, the body had to be reburied, a long process and new equipment. After the Golden State Killer was caught, after 40 years, people began to believe genetic genealogy testing. Investigators used modern DNA testing to build a DNA profile based on forensic-grade genome sequencing. Then, this profile was compared to profiles on ancestry websites. These websites have profiles from hundreds of people who have given their DNA samples to find and track their families around the world. Investigators made many family trees based on the DNA of Mojave Jane Doe. Investigators spent a lot of time looking at the family trees. Through elimination, they were able to find a few distant ancestors and the closest living cousins. They found a family member who was willing to give a new sample of DNA. 3 months later, the good results were confirmed. On Monday, January 23, 2023, 52 years after the Mojave Jane Doe was found, the call lead detective Lori Miller had been waiting for came. They each got a name. After 50 years, the Jane Doe was found to be Colleen Audrey Rice. Before the Mojave County Sheriff's Office posted on Facebook Monday afternoon, the rest of Colleen's family members knew. Colleen was born on March 17, 1931, to James C. Rice and Flossie Truitt. She is from Portsmouth, Ohio, and her family lives in eastern Kentucky. No one knows about her brothers. Colleen went to Portsmouth High School, but in 1946, she married William Davis, who was only 15. After looking at old school papers, investigators found a picture of her in a yearbook that they put in her case file. At 39, Colleen would have died. No one knew about her life. Investigators didn't find out much about Colleen's family because they lived far away. Colleen was no longer close to her family and husband. She looked like she was about to have a baby, but there was no way to find her children or make sure she did. Colleen's absence wiped out all of her memories. The investigation into Colleen's landing in Arizona also fizzled. Colleen's body was clean and in good shape when it was found. The police wanted to know if she had changed her name to start a new life away from her family, but no one in Kingman remembered her. All of the legal steps were done after the probe, so her family could bury her. In February 2023, her body was dug up and taken to Ohio to be buried with her family. In their oldest case, investigators finally found the person who had been hurt. It was a relief to find out the victim's name. Kristen Middleman, Othramenge, Chief Development Officer, said it is uplifting to see law enforcement and the people work together to find out who a woman who was killed 50 years ago was. Investigators really cared about the case. They felt that Colleen deserved to die with honor. Lori Miller, who was in charge of investigating the cold case, stuck the composite sketch to her computer to remember her every day of who and what they were fighting for. Miller had said that the victim used to be called Jane Doe, but now that she had a name, it made her feel sad. She also said that finding witnesses to the event was one of the team's biggest problems, and that it was hard to find people who were still alive. Wow! 13 News found a distant cousin of Colleen's. Eli Allen is Colleen's grandfather on her mother's side. He lives in Ohio. Allen found out they were connected when he heard about the case and saw the name of the victim. He knew they were connected when he saw rice, which came from his mother's family. He and others found Colleen after 50 years. Investigators are trying to figure out who killed her and dumped her body. At the autopsy, there was no alien DNA, which ruled out an attack. Colleen left on her own, which proves that she wasn't killed. No one who knew her seemed interested in finding her during the 50-year search, since no missing person report was made. Colleen's murder had nothing to do with people who did bad things in the 1970. The way she died did not help police find trends among serial killers. Colleen was found, but the case is still going on. We tell stories like Colleen's to show how hard detectives work and how amazing technological advances are making it possible to solve cases that many people thought would never be solved. Our community should also learn from these models. Please tell the police if you know anything about this case or other crimes that haven't been solved. You might figure out who did it. What was the saddest thing about the case today? It took decades to figure out who she was, or that when she went missing, no one looked for her. Leave a comment. Stay safe.